I love RPGs, in all their forms. Whether they're electronic or tabletop, Japanese, European, or American, I freaking love them. But there's a very fundamental difference between the two. An electronic RPG can easily be enjoyed by one person. In fact, in most cases, they're designed specifically to be played by one person, alone, on their own, without anyone else. Tabletop RPGs, on the other hand, not so much. While the internet has made it much easier to connect with others who like that sort of stuff, finding and getting a group together to actually play these games can still be a bit of a nightmare, especially if you happen to be a person with poor social skills and have difficulty approaching people to ask if they're interested. And that's why I'll most likely die alone. Anyway, sorry state of my social and love life aside, I still love to collect tabletop RPGs, and of the few that I've read and analyzed and collected, one of the best that sticks out to me is Ironclaw, Squaring the Circle. Now, if that intro didn't clue you in, I'm incredibly socially awkward, and therefore haven't gotten a group together to actually play this game. This review is basically based around my having read the book and tried to formulate some campaign ideas and characters and whatnot in my own spare time. I have also watched other people who have played this game, if that helps any. Thanks for that, Internet. Ironclaw is an anthropomorphic RPG set in a low fantasy world very closely modeled off of Western European history. It's put out by Sanguine Productions, a small company that's been operating since 1997 and has put out several very nice role-playing games. Some of those are based on pre-existing franchises like Usagi Yojimbo and Albedo, but most of their time and energy has been focused on their original properties like Stones, Myriad Song, and of course, Ironclaw. So let's start off with the basics of any RPG, its setting. As I mentioned before, Ironclaw takes place in a world of low fantasy, meaning that while magic is prevalent here, it is not all-encompassing, powerful, or even that widely used. There aren't even that many monsters in the world. Most of the monsters are just ordinary beasts, part of the world's ecology. Most of your enemies in this game are bandits, brigands, other NPCs. There are the occasional ghosts and zombies, but those are usually in relation to necromancers or dark forces. They're not especially common. And for those of you who enjoy history, there's no shortage of it. If you have the host's book, or in my case, the complete omnibus, the entirety of the second half of the book is dedicated to fleshing out the world and its history, and it's almost a direct parallel to the actual history of Europe during a similar period. Around the time when royalty and nobility were losing their grip on power, the middle and merchant class was starting to become a dominant force in the world, and gunpowder was starting to see more widespread application. And seriously, the amount of backstory that you get in this section is truly commendable. Hundreds of years worth of lore and history for not only the continent as a whole, but each of the individual noble houses as well. And believe me, these history lessons lead to some very fine ideas and adventure hooks later. Because if the context of this world's history didn't give it away, this isn't a terribly combat-focused game. Well, combat still exists, and it's very fun, engaging, and robust enough that you could base an entire adventure or campaign around combat if you wanted to. But the real draw of its mechanics and setting is in its use of diplomacy, politics, and character interaction. When you create a character in this game, you aren't creating just a killing machine attempting to determine how to make them more effective in combat. Even a relatively skilled character in combat is still capable of being brought down by ordinary enemies, no matter how skilled you start out as. Speaking of building characters, that's one of the best parts of the game because of how versatile it is. There are very few limitations on how you can make your character. Here's how it works. You start out by assigning your starting stats, but rather than assigning or rolling specific numbers, you are given a preset number of die sizes. You get 2d8s, 3d6s, and a lonely little d4, and those can be assigned however you want to your 6 stats: body, speed, mind, will, career, and species. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory. Body is how strong and physically fit you are, speed is basically your dexterity, but where it gets interesting is in career and species, essentially how good you are at your chosen profession, or how closely you identify with your own species, and how well you can use their inherent gifts. And this is where the brilliance of the game really shines. Your character can literally be anything you want them to be. You want to be a skunk gunsmith? Go for it. A fox scribe? Word up. A rabbit witch hunter? You can make it happen. There's almost no combination between class and species that is inherently better or worse than anything else. They may more easily fit into specific archetypes, like the smooth-talking rogue, the hot-headed bounty hunter, the taciturn magician, and so forth, but it's very easy to create a character that does pretty much whatever you want them to do. While it's not a good idea to try and make a total jack-of-all-trades, you don't need to overly specialize to feel useful. A character can be just as good at tossing boulders at people as they are at playing chess, and it totally works. The character customization continues to be strong in choosing gifts and skills. Again, nothing is locked off here, and a character receives 3 free skills based on their career and another 3 based on their species, but other than those, you can basically take on whatever you want so long as a few small rules are adhered to. For example, you can't take on gifts that would contradict one another, you can't take on gifts that are marked as having a required parent skill unless you have the parent skill, and there's a small selection of skills and gifts that the game master can say no to since they have the potential to affect the plot in certain ways, such as having an NPC ally or servant following you around everywhere. You're further encouraged to build a bigger emphasis on your character's personality with the goals and motto system. The PCs are required to think up a motto for their character, basically a personal creed that the character will live by. A few examples given in the book are honor in all things, or the candle that burns twice as bright dies twice as fast. And you can build upon this with the goals mechanic, where each character can have up to 3 goals at a time. They can start off pretty mundane and kind of video gamey, like win a fight, earn a certain amount of money, gain a reliable ally, and so on and so forth. But as the adventures continue and characters get a bit more fleshed out, the goals can become more complex and more specific, and harder to realize, but by that point, every time a goal is met, it's a cause for celebration. The other main reason for working towards those goals and playing your character according to your motto is because it can earn you extra experience points, at the GM's discretion for good role-playing. And what about the actual mechanics of the game, the rolling the dice part? It's boiled down to the basics here in the name of keeping the game moving at a good clip, with almost no exceptions. Certainly not in the case of any basic rolls you have to make. You never have to add up any of the dice that you roll. Instead, you merely compare the size of your rolls against either a challenge or a contest. A contest is between 2 separate die rolls, for example, any combat roll. Your attack versus their dodge, your shield versus their strike, your willpower versus their magic, and so on and so forth. Or, outside of combat, determining the outcome of haggling, arm wrestling, a staring contest, things like that. A challenge, on the other hand, is usually against a static number, and represents an obstacle in your path. Climbing a wall, fording a river, jumping a chasm, the fun adventuring stuff that doesn't involve a sword. In both cases, what you want is to accrue successes, which are determined by either rolling a number higher than the challenge's rating, or rolling numbers that are higher than the rolls of your opponents in a contest. For example, if I have a squirrel character who has a D6 in climbing, and the challenge number for climbing a wall is 4, which is considered average difficulty, that means I'd have to roll at least a 4 in order to successfully climb it on a D6. Those aren't very good odds. But because my squirrel identifies closely with her species, as she has a D12 in her species stat, and since squirrels are naturally gifted climbers, I can add in that D12 with my D6, giving me much greater odds of success so long as I roll a 4 or higher on at least one of those 2 die. 1 success is all I need, but 2 can be even better. And of course, there are plenty of other rules concerning high and low rolls, such as the only way to seriously botch whatever you're doing is to naturally roll a 1 on every die that you throw, or how getting 5 successes against a single opponent is an overwhelming victory, and they're all rolled into the game very nicely. But the game, again, actively encourages you to roleplay more than, rather, relying on die rolls and contests to settle things. If you're in a diplomatic situation when you're actively trying to convince someone to do something for you, then actually roleplay it out rather than just rolling the die. It makes it far more interesting for both you and the rest of the party, and of course might get you some extra XP down the line. XP in this game works pretty simply, and you gain it at a slow pace and in low amounts. From the book itself, you gain 1 point of XP for sitting in on the briefing before the game starts. You gain a point of experience for living up to your character's motto, and you get an experience point for taking part in the debriefing at the end of a session. Rather than leveling up in this game, you can exchange experience points that you earn, once you have enough, to either increase the size of your die in one of your skills, called adding a mark to it, increasing the size of one of your stat die, or buying an entirely new skill, or just gaining a single mark in it. You also have the option of selling one of your skills or abilities for an extra experience point if you really want to, at the cost of not having that ability anymore. And trust me, it's pretty good to have a variety of skills at your disposal. Not only can certain skills grant you more die to rolls in specific situations, but almost every skill comes with a perk that you can activate when certain prerequisites are met that can help you out in combat. For example, if you have the gift of cowardice, and yes, it is considered a gift, you can force yourself to become afraid at any time you want. Now that might sound kind of stupid, but while being afraid does force you to keep your distance from enemies, it also forces you to keep your distance from enemies. You also get a massive bonus to your speed die, your dodge die, basically any roll that's meant to keep you alive and out of the enemy's way. Unfortunately, this does bring up my only one real criticism with the book's mechanics, especially when it comes to combat. While under normal circumstances, combat has a very nice flow to it, it's easy to understand, and it moves at a good clip, when you have a bunch of characters and later enemies who all have a bunch of these skills and feats as well, it can be a struggle to keep track of it all. Some of these activate to counteract or contradict another person's gifts, others can lead into long, complicated chains of effects that can just be a headache to keep track of. It can also be difficult to keep track of the amount of times a gift is used, as most of them have a limit on how many times you can activate them in order to keep you from spamming gifts like, say, luck. Some of them can only be activated once a scene, others once a play session, and still more only once in an adventure. After that, they're exhausted and can't be used again until they're refreshed. For this reason, it's recommended that the GM put a cap on just how many of these things can be activated at once to avoid a gift conga line. But again, that's a relatively minor complaint about an otherwise very well-crafted mechanics system, and it really only comes into play in later adventures when characters have had a chance to beef themselves up. All in all, this is a fantastic game all the way around. Again, this is coming from someone whose experience with the game has come from reading the book several times over and constructing various characters and scenarios, but I haven't had a chance to play the game with anyone else. But from everything that I've seen and tested, I can say that I haven't found too many problems with it. If you're interested in the game, it's easy enough to grab via Sanguine's website, and out of all the different versions, I highly recommend getting the Omnibus Edition, as it's not only a nice hardback book, but it also rolls both Player's Handbook and the Host Book into one convenient tome, with the first half full of all the necessary rules and mechanics, and the second half being full of useful world building and campaign building information and tools. And of course, as with every good RPG, there are a few expansions you can get to give you more options for campaigns and character creation, such as the Book of Jade, which adds an entire Asia-themed continent with new philosophies, new species, and new careers you can use, or the Book of Mysteries, which adds druidic-themed classes and magic to the world. Now, like I said before, this is a very easy game to get a hold of since it's still being printed today, and is very easy to find on both Sanguine's main website and also print-on-demand services like DriveThruRPG. And I do highly recommend that you get the omnibus format, even though it is the most expensive one if you're trying to get the hardcover version. You can get a digital-only version for about $30, and all of the supplemental material ranges from anywhere to $10 to $20 depending on what it is. So it's not like you don't have options. And I hope you enjoyed this review, and I do apologize that I'm primarily just going off of an initial review of the book itself rather than actually having played the game, but hey, those are the breaks. And I spend 90% of my time on the internet instead of interacting with real people, so what do you expect? I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time.